Hi, everyone. I'm Tran Bowie. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Let me start by taking you back, way back, 45 years ago, April 30th, 1975. My parents, Tu and Vic Bowie, who were only in their 20s at the time, decided when communist troops were coming into the capital of South Vietnam, they decided that they wanted to flee and have a better life in the United States. For whatever reason, they chose to jump onto this fishing boat with a bunch of strangers and try for a life with freedom. Often when I think about that, I wonder if that was being courageous or just crazy, or maybe both. But they ended up being picked up. We ended up being picked up by the US Coast Guard. So it was my parents and my sisters and I. I was only 3.5 at the time. My sisters were 2 and 1. And we were on this boat with a bunch of strangers, only with our personal belongings, only certain documents. People on the boat were getting sick. So there's dehydration and diarrhea and seasickness and just fear that set in. So we were picked up by the US Coast Guard and taken to refugee camps. So we stayed in the Philippines, Guam, Wake Island, and then eventually we flew to the United States, and we ended up at Fort Chaffee, Arkansas, a military base right outside of Fort Smith. We eventually would be sponsored by a couple in Fort Smith and ended up living there until I was in my 20s. So I want to fast forward to 2015 when I would meet Jim Logue, of all places, at the Paint Rock Valley Bluegrass Festival. This is where my father-in-law grew up. And Jim introduced me to Don Stone. And the two men were Vietnam War veterans. So even though we were strangers, we ended up having a special bond because of the connection we had that we experienced the Vietnam War together. And I'm going to bring on my friends, and I can't hear you all out there, but if you will just give the biggest heroes welcome to Jim Logue and Don Stone. Here they are. Hi, friends.
Hi, Tran.
So before we start talking, I want to just read your background to share with our viewers. So Jim, who was only 17 years old when he was sent to Vietnam. I mean, that's just a kid. He's a Tennessee boy from Nashville. He served 2 tours, so he got to see Vietnam from a distance because he stayed on a ship, and it was called the USS Halsey. Don was 25, and he's a Kansas boy. He actually was with the U.S. Air Force Security Service. So what's interesting is Don volunteered to serve in the Vietnam War, and his missions were classified, so he can't talk too much about that, but he did get to be on land and see the country and meet the people there. So, gentlemen, thank you so much for doing this. I know that we've talked about this personally over the last few years, but I feel like it's been really difficult for people who experience to talk about this publicly. Why do you think that is, Jim?
Well, it's something that it's kind of devastating to you all of a sudden to be put in a position like this, and it's not your norm, and you wonder moment by moment, okay, what's going to happen next? But luckily, we had a chief that would come by every so often and talk to us and encourage us, and we'd go through different scenarios about what could happen, what could possibly happen. But he gave us complete confidence that he was tell us that I know you'll do your job. I know you'll do what's right. And I know you do whatever we can to protect our home.
Jim, you were only 17. When I think about my son is 15, to think that sending him overseas into war, what were you feeling at this time?
Well, I volunteered for the Navy, but I did not know that I would end up in this situation. Now, how did I feel? I came from a happy-go-lucky, always liked to cut up, to a very quiet person.
Wow.
I was to myself, I was quiet, and I honestly think that I grew up like overnight at this moment.
Right, you had to be strong. And Don, you were 25, is that correct? And now you're being put into a these missions are classified. How are you feeling?
Well, I knew they had a need over there because they sent a message to us in the Philippines, and I thought about it for a little bit, and I was talking to my senior master sergeant, and I said, I want to go, and he said, why? I said, well, there's a war over there, and they need somebody, so I want to go.
Did you regret it when you got? Yeah. Did you regret it when you got there?
No. When I got, I knew it was in a war zone as soon as I hit the tarmac and landed, and you could hear the. Well, the first thing I saw was a F-100 Voodoo taking off, fully loaded with bombs, and then we went down to the armory to pick up weapons. So I knew we were in a war zone at that time.
So, Jim, you were not on land. You witnessed it from sea. So tell me what was happening on the USS Halsey at this time.
Well, the two different times we was there, the first time was during President Nixon's resignation. We were sent there and we patrolled up and down the coast for a good 2 weeks. And the purpose was to show strength, that America was still strong. Even though we had a president resign, we had a new president coming up, President Ford. But we were still strong. We were still a strong nation. But the second time was a different situation. We left really quick out of the Philippines, and we were full steam ahead going to Vietnam the second time. Now, I always knew because I was in the boiler room, we had 4 boilers, 2 in the front, 2 in the back. And when you had all 4 lit up and all 4 engines running wide open, the ship had a shake to it, and you knew you was at full steam. And they didn't tell us where we was going at first, but the next day they came on the intercom, the captain did, and told us that we're headed straight to Vietnam. And that's all I can tell you. All I can tell you is be ready, be prepared. We're going to general quarters now. And we stayed in general quarters till we got there. The whole day we was there until we left. The first time during Nixon's resignation, we was at general quarters there the whole 2 weeks. We had 6 hours on, 6 hours off. But we really didn't know what to expect here. Anything could have possibly happened.
Right.
When Nixon and they signed the treaty to end the war, North Vietnam agreed to stay on their side of Vietnam. But during the fall of Saigon, they broke that treaty. And here they came. And I give credit to President Ford for trying every way in the world to do what he could to put a stop to it. You know, I look back now and I could have reached out and grabbed Vietnam. I felt like I was so close, I could have just reached out and grabbed it. And in my mind was thinking all the lives that had died here, all the people that I knew that had died here. And I forget now how many thousands of people we lost during that war. But here I am here in a situation that could escalate any moment or not. How do I feel? Well, I was a little nervous. I grew up. I became stern, you might say, firm. I answered my questions when I was asked. I did what I was told. I didn't elaborate. And I felt that was the best thing for me to do because we had people on our ship that had been there during the Vietnam War and they knew what to do. The second time we was there, I could see Vietnam, but there were ships in closer. We were kind of on the outskirts, like standby. We were ready. If we were needed, we were ready. And we were supposed to stay down in the ship. We wasn't supposed to be in topside because we were at combat ready. And if they were to send a missile, you wouldn't have had time to get in the ship. You know, you could have got killed easily. So I snuck topside, which I wasn't supposed to do, but I got to look through the big binoculars, and I seen a ship hit the ocean, and I knew right then there's something bad going on. But they wouldn't tell us; it was top secret. Like Don, he was in a mission. He couldn't tell what he was in. I couldn't tell what we was in. And as we were leaving, uh, you survived by being on a boat. Your family put you on a boat, headed out from Vietnam, straight out into the ocean, not knowing where you were going, not knowing what you may run into. And we seen the same thing. But, we talked, it could have possibly been yours, but whatever. But you going on to a Coast Guard ship, that tells me it probably wasn't your boat that we were a part of, because we took them to a Red Cross ship. But anyway, it doesn't matter. The matter is, here's a situation: people were fleeing for their life. If they hadn't of, their odds of living would not have been there, and most people would have died. So your parents did the best thing possible for you and your family by getting you on the boat.
No, when I think about that, as a child, it's funny because it seems so unreal that I didn't want to believe it. Like, who decides to do that? You're a parent with 3 little kids, and my parents couldn't swim, and they decided to get on this boat. So it shows you how precious freedom is, and something that we take for granted, and yet they were willing to risk it all for that freedom. And if we were not picked up by the U.S. Coast Guard on that day, it could have been tragic, because we left when we did before the pirates were out, before more communist troops were out. So we got out because so much was going on inland. So Don, let's go to that. Tell us the scene for you. You were actually on land, and you were stationed right outside of Saigon, and Saigon is actually where I lived and where I was born. I still have family there now. So Don, what are some memorable moments, some things that you feel like you'll never get out of your head? And let's talk about some of the emotional stuff and but then also some of the good things.
Well, I'll start with the good things first. We were, like I say, we were at Thompson Air Base right outside of Saigon, and we were staying in an old hotel right at the outskirts of the air base, and myself and 2 of the pilots and a couple of crew members were on the 2nd floor, and we would occasionally, of course, we had to take our weapons with us everywhere we went, but we'd go to downtown Saigon, and there was a lot of activity down there, but the Vietnamese people were very nice to us. Probably just because we were there to help them, or maybe they were just nice, period. I don't know. But we were always treated very nicely. Scariest things was waking up in the middle of the night with big strobe lights. Sounded like, well, when I first heard it, it sounded like a mortar fire, because you could hear this loud whoomp, and then you'd hear the 50 calibers machine guns shooting. And I looked out, and I could see this strobe light on this Huey, and found out later that they had spotted some Viet Cong outside, and sneaking up on the base. So they sent this Huey out with this strobe light, and it would blind you if you looked at it. And once they spotted him, then they would attack. And hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I don't think it ever went down until I left. But it was a mixture of feeling good about being there and stark terror sometimes.
Did you think you were going to make it out?
I really didn't think about it. I always just thought, well, I'm going to make it, uh, and never ever thought about not making it.
Wow.
So I
Jim, what?
guess
You
I,
never let it cross your mind.
Wow.
no, we were usually too busy. We didn't have that much downtime to think about stuff.
Yeah, and probably you were trained not to think that way,
Right.
to survive.
Yeah,
So,
you had to be focused.
well, the thing that I know that it took a long time for us to have these conversations publicly. For the Vietnamese people, sometimes we felt like we're just a reminder of this bad time. But how were you feeling when you had to leave? Because I know that for a while, my family, we didn't talk about it. And I often wondered if the Vietnamese people were resentful of Americans for leaving, and if Americans were resentful of the Vietnamese for forcing them to come or being forced to come. What are your thoughts on that, Don?
I never thought of it that way. Like you were talking earlier about freedom, the reason I went there was because we knew we were fighting communism and trying to help these people be free because the North was trying to take over the South. And I also knew that they were being supplied by China and Russia because those Soviet MiGs were not Vietnamese made. They had to come from China or Russia. Um, I never felt resentful. I always felt like we were there to do a job and to help these people survive. Hopefully, we were going to get a better outcome than we did, but that didn't happen. Um, our weak-kneed politicians in Washington just did not back us up. So there was like
That's right.
58,000 and some people killed for what? And then they just threw in the towel and pulled out. I was there ahead of Jim. I was there in 65 and 66 when the war was fresh. But I can remember when President Johnson stopped over flights uh, or flights up to North Vietnam and bombing runs. And we could see recon photos where the communists were, there was a big long valley that you just flew up. And we could spot them putting SAM sites on either side of the mountains going up that valley. And I looked at this major and I said, next, if they ever open these flights up again, that's your first target. And he said, yeah, we're going to have to take them out as we go up. And when I left, my biggest fear, because we knew that the VC would stand down at the end of the runway and shoot at the aircraft as they were taking off. My biggest fear was I was going to get shot down as I was leaving,
Right.
which didn't happen.
And Jim, when you were leaving, as the war is the beginning of the end, what were your thoughts?
Well, I knew enough about Vietnam to know that the way it ended in 72 wasn't the right thing. How it ended. If they would have finished,
Right.
if they would have finished what they set out to do, the fall of Saigon wouldn't have happened.
Yep.
But even though it did, and I told you earlier, President Ford tried to get the backing to go in there and put a stop to them invading Saigon. But the thing about that really hurts me that I have found out through the years, knowing that all these North Vietnamese people were no longer under the ground. Now they were topside. They were coming in. They were on every road coming into Saigon. And it was, you could see them for miles coming in all the way from North Vietnam. They had them right there. Now, we were at combat ready. There were other ships combat ready. And I thought, why didn't we end it right there? We could have took it over and finished it that one day. That one day could have changed the whole outcome of the Vietnam. era. But it didn't happen. Congress didn't support Ford, and he told him what he thought about him. I sent you a video of that, Duran, of how he let him know what he thought. America is supposed to be people that take care of people that are in need, that have been run from their homes and destroyed. But here at this time, Don, you're right. We abandoned them people.
Yeah.
Now, but what America didn't want to hear was this began what is known as the killing fields. And so many people were killed for no reason from this day on.
So let me.
I told you I'd never met anybody that was rescued that day until we met you. And that's true. That's a very true statement. But I've always been inquisitive and wanted to know as much as I could about that time. My heart always pours out. And I've told you, and I want everybody to know that knows you to understand you're a very fortunate lady. Your parents did what they needed to do to save y'all's life. And they got you to America. Luckily, even though they wasn't willing to support ending North Vietnam coming in, they were willing to put you to where you could grow and be educated and have a home and go to college and have a life. Now here you are, you have a family, a beautiful family. And to me, in knowing this and seeing it in you, it hits me right here in my heart because I know what went on. I know what I saw. If Ford would have sent the order, we would have began firing upon North Vietnam right then and there.
Well,
and
Jim,
I would have done everything in my power. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
No. Well, I said I wouldn't cry this soon in the broadcast, but let me just try to get through this part of it. Is that I hope you don't feel too much after all the time, so much guilt, because we were able to thrive because of what you did for our people. So I don't take that for granted. So I hope you know that. And I'm going to continue so people aren't just here to watch me cry. So let's talk about when you came home. This was anything but a hero's welcome, right, Don? You had served your country. You've spent most of your life in the military, and you come home, and then what happens? What was the reception that you received?
Never thought I'd have to fight my way back into my own country, but as soon as I left, excuse me, as soon as I got my papers and left Travis Air Force Base, I went over to the airfield at to catch a flight to Texas to see my future wife, and I was in dress blues and had my AWOL bag with me. Bags had already been checked, and I was walking down the runway to catch my flight, and there were 4 long-haired hippies that started calling names, and they would just acted like they were going to take me on. So I took over, laid my hat down on the ledge over there and set my AWOL bag, turned around, and I said, if you guys want a piece of me, you just bring it on. And for some reason or other, I guess they decided they didn't want to do that. So they turned around and left. But I already had my plans laid that Jean and I were going to get married, and I was going to go back to college and finish my college, get a job, and we were going to raise a family. So that was what I was aiming for.
And that's what kept
That's what kept me focused.
Yeah. So Jim, when you returned, I mean, you were 17 when you were serving in the war. When you came home, what was that like for you?
The first few times I came home, I was proud. I wore my uniform home. I wore it everywhere I went.
Yep.
But eventually, nobody cared, and nobody wanted to know what all you've been through and what you've been doing. And finally, I just quit wearing it. And I'm going to say this now, and this will give you an understanding of how I felt when I come home. I told you when I first went to Vietnam during Nixon's resignation, I got a letter out before they quarantined us with no mail. Well, when we got back a week or so later, I got a letter from my dad, and I told him about us going to Vietnam for some reason. I didn't know why, but for some reason. And he wrote me back and told me, he said, if you can't write me without lying, don't write nothing at all. I was kind of devastated. So all this that I've told you since we've been talking, I've never talked to nobody about it except my wife, Marcia. It's just something that I went through. Some of it I'm proud of. But when I come home, when I was done, uh, people didn't care that I've been in the Navy. I go get a job, they wouldn't ask me, have you served in the military? They didn't ask me.
Yeah.
And if
It's,
if you told people, what would their reaction be?
there was no reaction, really. I mean, you tell people that, hey, I would like a job with you. I've served in the military. I've done this, blah, blah, blah. And then they would ask you questions that had nothing to do with your military service. And I wondered, like, I went in so proud. I had a determination to survive and come home with an honorable discharge. And I succeeded in that. It was tough. It was hard. But I didn't let no one stand in my way of getting it. I had a lot of fights while I was in, and I had a lot of fights when I come home. Don had one in the airport. Well, I had some fights with people that would start running their mouth. I wouldn't put up with it. I just take them on. I didn't care who they were, how big they were. I won a lot of fights. I lost some fights, but they knew they had a fight when they fought with me.
And Don, how did that make you feel? Because you come home and you are made to feel proud to join the military, and then you're made to feel ashamed when you got back.
I didn't. They were trying to make me feel ashamed, but that never happened. I was still proud of what I did, proud of serving in the Air Force, proud to serve my country. Um, I didn't let any long-haired hippies tell me that what I did was wrong. I knew what I did was right. And all of my family and friends, when I got back home, uh, they were happy to see me. They were proud of what I did. I had cousins in Marines, Navy, um, Coast Guard, every branch of the service except the Air Force. So I was filling in that gap. So we all knew that what we did was right. And of course, when I went to see my wife, I went back to Texas, and the air base that I trained at was right outside of San Angelo, Texas, at Goodfellow Air Force Base. So I knew I was among friends there and didn't have to worry about it. When I went back to college, had an economics professor, 200 or 300 freshman class. I was in a second semester sophomore. He was going to talk to about the Vietnam War and call us all baby killers and all that stuff. And needless to say, I interrupted his class and shut his mouth down. Then I went to the dean of the school and complained about it. And I don't think he lasted very long after I wrote a letter to the United States senator that was from my state. But no, I never let him talk me down. I was just too hard-headed and I just wouldn't back down.
Well, it's almost like you were fighting it over in Vietnam and you're coming back and you're still fighting it.
Yeah.
So when did it become safe enough to talk about it? And before you answer that, Jim, for those of you who are watching, if you have any questions, please comment, put them in the comments below. We're going to try to answer them during the broadcast, and if we don't get to it, we'll answer them afterwards. Because for those of you who are watching, I just think this is such an important topic. We see it, we've seen some documentaries, we have the history books and stuff, but to actually talk to people who experienced it in very different forms of it as well, I think is so important. And now is the time to start asking these questions. Let me see. Steve K is saying, my cousin Jim always had a short fuse. Not surprised at all. He didn't put any of that crap. So that's funny. So, Jim, when did it become safe to start talking about this and about your experience in Vietnam?
Well, some years later, we would see something on TV, and me and my wife would be watching it. And then I'd comment a little bit, about it, what was going on. And then as time went on, we'd see something else, and I'd comment a little bit more. There's still a lot of things I haven't talked about, but I have talked about a lot of this stuff that I've talked with you about. I still really don't care about talking about a lot of it because my heart pours out to these people because so many died senseless for no reason. And there's nothing to brag about. There is no bragging rights here, none, on both sides.
Yep.
I'm ashamed of what happened. I'm ashamed of what America did. But I'm proud to be here, and I'm proud to be an American. I was proud to serve in the Navy. If I had to do over again, I would do it and wouldn't bat an eye. If I was called to serve again, even as much arthritis as I've got, I would still try to go if I could. But I've never regretted being in the Navy. I had a goal, and once I got in there, I seen that goal wasn't going to work, so I served my time, enjoyed myself, and I came home. One of those goals that I had was a career. Maybe I thought maybe I'd stay in the Navy, make a career. But the married lives of a lot of people that I've seen, I knew I could do better. So I served my time. I came home. About a year and a half later, I met my wife. We got married the following year, and we've been married 42 years, 43 coming up. So I got a lot to be thankful for and a lot to be proud of, and I think I made the right judgment call on coming home when I did. I listened.
Speaking of your lovely wife, Marcia is saying that you were very proud to hang that honorable discharge on the wall. We were a few months from having our first child, and that's something I do want to point out. Only recently did Jim start taking out all the things that you see behind him and probably displaying it for people to see. So that I'm so glad that you did, because it does need to be seen and shown and shared. So we thank you for that. What's that? That's your honorable discharge. Aww.
Yes, ma'am. That's it right there.
Thank you, sir. So we do have a question here from Tammy. Did either of you ever seek mental health therapy to navigate through all the emotions and feelings you were dealing with during and after the war? Was it helpful? And if not, do you wish that you had? Don?
No, I never, I guess I never had to, or never didn't think I had to. Jim would probably tell you I'm a little bit off balance anyway, but no, fortunately, I didn't need any mental therapy. I had my family and my friends, and I guess I just didn't feel the need to have to do that. And the only thing that it took me probably 6 months to a year I'd hear a car backfire or a loud crash or a bang, I'd jump.
Oh.
It's and sometimes the hair on the back of my neck could stand up.
Even today, you still?
No, that went away, but it was probably about the first 6 months, maybe to a year. My wife would look at me when kind of funny when I do that, and I just have to explain to her, I'm still just a little jumpy.
Right. So what about you, Jim?
It took me about a year and a half to calm down, just to slow down when I came home.
Yeah.
I was 17, come home when I was 19. I was a little skinny, wiry little fella into everything. And I was a party-hardy man. Okay. Trust me, I loved having a good time.
I haven't heard those stories.
Probably won't either. Not on the air.
I don't think you want me to tell all those stories right
Yeah,
here.
maybe we'll save that for another episode.
Yeah.
But I will tell you this, and I've told my wife many times that I had to get away. And when I came home, I said it took about a year and a half to slow down. I had to leave Nashville. If I would have stayed, I might not be where I am today. So me and my wife, Marcia, we made a decision, and I moved to Crossville, Tennessee. I left everybody behind and started to try to make a new life for myself, slowing down. We had a little farm. I enjoyed working on that farm. And when the kids started coming along, I kept telling myself, some of my family members said, you ain't never going to amount to nothing. And I keep looking at my kids, and I look at my grandkids today. I said, now tell me that.
Yeah.
Don't tell me I ain't never going to amount to nothing.
Well,
because I'm proud of all of them.
very nice.
Now, I've made my mistakes, and I'll probably make many more. But the day I met you in Paint Rock Valley.
You're going to make me cry again?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. I'm ready.
We was getting ready. Those of you that don't know us, me in Kansas, we've done reenactments of gunfights at the Old West. And we was fixing to do a gunfight. And I spotted Taran in the crowd. And the funny part was I asked her, I said, where are you from? She said, oh, I'm from Atlanta. I kind of grinned a little bit. And then I looked at her, I said, no, ma'am, where are you from? And then she told me. She hesitated, but then she finally told me. Well, my family and me left abruptly when I was 3 years old from Vietnam. And I got to thinking, and I looked at her again, it's possible. I said, are you referring to the fall of Saigon? And she hesitated again. And she said, yes, sir. Then I hesitated because I was about to get teary-eyed. And I told you, I never thought I'd ever see the day that I would see anybody that had been rescued that day. And I said, here you are. Here you are.
So I will continue that story. So I was there with my family and some friends because my father-in-law is from Paint Rock Valley, right outside of Huntsville. And Jim came up and we started talking and we took a picture. He's like, I need you to meet my friend Don. So I met Don that day too. So we took a picture together, and I love this picture because you two are in your reenactment costumes, and I was wearing camo because we were having a camo weekend. So that's the picture of when we met. And I told Jim, I'll send you these pictures when I get home. And I had misplaced his email address. And what's so interesting is fast forward to 2016. We met in 2015. 2016. My family and I decided to return to Vietnam after 40 years. It'd been 40 years.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm gonna start crying. And so for whatever reason, I was looking through some old stuff and I found his email address. So I had to send him those pictures. And so that's how we reconnected again. And then Facebook has allowed me to see him more often and then and be reunited with Don again. And so now we're forever friends. Okay, I'm going to go on to a question. And speaking of my camo buddy, this is my husband, Scott. Do you feel as though the appreciation for your service has changed to a point of vocally saying thank you, or do you still feel there is still a different attitude towards the Vietnam War versus Iran, Iraq, and other wars? Don?
I always had an appreciation for the Vietnam War. I don't know. I don't think I understand his question, but anytime you're in a war, I don't care if it's Iran, Iraq war, or whatever. It's an experience that you'll never forget. I don't think, and I sympathized and empathized with these soldiers that went to Iran, or not to Iran, but to Iraq and Afghanistan. And I've talked to some of them after they came back and worked with some of them in civilian life. But I think what's helped me understand a lot more, I've got a friend, his name is Don Hood, that served 2 tours as a gunner on a Huey. He volunteered twice to go back. You're a gunner on a Huey, that's sitting up there, you're a target. And he did it twice at least. If he may have gone back 3 times, I don't know. And then I had a friend of mine, a close friend of mine, as soon as I'd been back, married, probably 6, 7 months, and his little brother that I knew from high school had been killed. Somebody stepped on a landmine and he got the brunt end of it. And that really brought it home. But I don't know. I don't know what else to say about it.
Well, Jim, do you think that because so much time has passed, that people are more vocal, it is more open, it is more so-called accepted now?
Let me hear the question again.
Sure. Let's see if I can go find. Do you feel as though the appreciation for your service has changed to a point of vocally saying thank you, or do you still feel that there is still a different attitude towards the Vietnam War versus other wars? Because that's right. The Vietnam War was, we've apparently have seen other wars, but the Vietnam War is one that we probably don't talk about much, and definitely really did not celebrate it until recently, when we started seeing more documentaries and kind of getting stories from people behind the scenes. So Jim, do you think that that's true, that there is a greater appreciation now?
Well, there's a greater appreciation for people wanting to tell people that thank you for your service.
Right.
When I first started hearing that, I was hesitant to react because I did not know how to take it. But I smile, and try to say thank you the best I can. It still makes me a little bit nervous when I hear that. But if a child comes up to me or a young person, I'll spend a little time with them if I have time and tell them a little bit about it. And I'll pull my phone out and say, this is my ship. This is what I served on, But do I have appreciation towards that? Well, yes. But the bad part about it is, the sad part about it is, this time period that we're talking about is growing further and further away from the newer generation.
Yes.
That's the sad part. World War II, same thing. Korea War, same thing. You hardly hear anything about the Korean War anymore. Once in a while, you'll hear something. And the History Channel talks a lot about the fall of Saigon when it's about the choppers pulling people out and all that. They say a few things about how you were rescued, but they don't never talk about that much. They don't show pictures about that much. I told you the other day a lot of people that seeked out to find help to be rescued didn't find help. Uh, some starved to death. Some were shot out of the water. With North Vietnamese saying they would shoot them out of the water. They wouldn't even try to rescue them. So I have a lot of reservation still inside of me that's anger. Uh, but I try to smile when people tell me these things, thank you for your service. We're glad you served. Well, I'm glad I served too. But when you see things, and it's like Don, he's seen a lot more than I did. He's seen it firsthand. And
So, Don, why do you think it's important? It's hard to talk about it now. I mean, to me, it's just remarkable that it's been 45 years.
I know.
And I was only 3 when I left. And so obviously I really don't remember anything until we got to the refugee camps, the refugee camp in Arkansas. But then sometimes I wonder if those memories are memories from stories and photos or if they're really my memories. So my memories were just early on with seeing my parents just struggling financially, just trying to adjust. With many of the refugees that came over, they had no money. I mean, the dong, the Vietnamese dong was not worth anything here. Right. They had no money. They had to start all over. My parents did not have a car. They had to, find a way to get to work. They would walk, they would ride a bike. They would finally save up enough money to get a car. So I can't even believe it's been that long and how much has passed. So, Don, when you think about that, and you look at where we are now, what do you want people to take away
from this, to remember the war? I want them to, if they've never visited the Vietnam Wall in Washington, they need to go. It's very, very humbling. First time I saw it, I just about cried. In fact, I did, because there was my friend's little brother's name on there. So I did an etching and to take it back to his mother and father, because I don't think they'd ever seen it. But it's like the 9/11. How many people actually remember 9/11? That was an attack on American soil. And people just really don't like to talk about that anymore. They forget too soon. We were in Vietnam to try to help the South Vietnamese people be free from communist dictatorship. And same way with South Korea. We were there to fight a war to help the South Korean people from being overrun by the North Koreans and the Chinese. So I want them to not forget, Montgomery County last year or 2 years ago had a Vietnam Veterans Appreciation Day, and my wife and I went, and I felt very, very good about that. I can't remember how many were there, but there were a few Air Force, there were a few Navy, a lot of Army, a few Marines. But once you get in uniform, we're all brothers and sisters, they're for one common purpose. So it doesn't matter. But I guess that's what I'll take away. I'm glad my name is not on that wall, but I appreciate and honor every one of those people that gave their lives for that cause. And same way with Korea and World War II.
Thank you.
That's what I take away.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Jim, we're going to start wrapping up. So what would you want people to know? I know that, I appreciate you finally talking about this, especially with me. I'm very honored by that. But what do you want the general public to know?
war is inevitable, unfortunately. We're here today because of wars.
Yeah.
Sad to say. But wars can be avoided and not be into this kind of situation as this occurred. And several people have told me, and I've always felt, President Kennedy died too soon.
Yeah.
I think he had a mission and he didn't get to fulfill that mission. And maybe if he could have, it might not have lasted this long. Maybe, I don't know. It's possible. I believe that sometimes we have no choice but to go to war, but only on the last resort, as the last means. Because if you can't work it out, then somebody's going to attack. But it's best to try to work things out. Now, I could sit here and go through Korean War. I could go through Vietnam War. I could go through World War II. I know enough about World War I that I could tell you a lot about it. And go on back to the beginning, the War of Independence. Look at all these people who died. And through their death, we have what we call freedom that you mentioned earlier. Well, this freedom has been attacked many times, and it was attacked then, and it's been attacked in Iraq, and Iran, and it's still being attacked. The president the other day sent a memo out to the ships. If these gunboats get closer, shoot them out of the water.
Yeah.
Well, that's the answer that he needed to give his commanders, because if you're going to attack my ship, we're going to take you out. And they need that order, that freedom to take charge if need be.
So I want to say for everyone who is watching that this is really, our I feel duty to continue this story and to talk about it, whether it's a Vietnam War veteran or any other veteran, that this is the only way that we grow from it, that we learn from it, and that honestly we appreciate it. And I've told you gentlemen many times, but thank you again. Thank you for your service. Feel good in hearing that from us, because it is true, because we don't know what it's like, and we do appreciate the sacrifices that you've made and how humble you are in doing it. Yes, it is your job, or was your job, but it's not a job that most people would want to have. So
Taran, this person that just came on here says, I am honored to hear all of your share your experience.
yes,
My father served during the Vietnam War, and he does not talk or discuss it.
Yeah.
That's the reason he doesn't want to talk about it, is because he don't want to relive it.
Yeah.
That's the best answer I can tell you.
right.
Yeah.
Well, Michelle, if your dad is willing, I would love to connect you with Don and Jim. Because I have seen just in the last 5 years that this has been a healing process, really for all of us, because I'll be honest, I did not want to talk about it. My parents definitely did not want to talk about it. When I was younger, I would ask them and they would just give me barely the cliff notes. And I'll share that when we came over, for me personally, I wanted to fit in. And so having to draw any kind of attention to myself and that there was something different about us or about our family, I just did not want to share that kind of information. And so it wasn't until I was actually in TV news in Tallahassee when I was forced to start asking questions, because people started asking me questions and I was so embarrassed because I did not know. I did not have the answers. I just had blocked that out. And the more I started talking about it, especially with other people who had gone through the same thing, there was definitely a healing. And what happens after that is there's pride, where that was something we did not feel, or I did not feel before. So start crying again. But so because of that, now I'm so proud to be who I am and where I came from. I'm proud to know both of you.
We're all immigrants, Tran. My family are not Native Americans. We all came from Germany, England, Scotland, Ireland, and Jim's family. You're an immigrant too, right? We're all immigrants here. So
Scotland,
you're just
Ireland.
another part of the picture in America.
Well, thank you.
We're glad to have you.
Thank you so much.
We're
And
glad you got to know us.
I'm so glad I got to know you.
And I'm honored to have been asked to be on this program with you. Thank you.
Me
And
too.
and when Jim first approached me about it, I started to type, no, I don't think so, because it's so emotional. And I knew this would happen because even after 45 years, I can't talk about it without doing this. But it's so important for us to talk about it and to share and in the process heal. So with that said, I'm going to end it with my husband, who I knew was going to make me cry. Thank you for your service, and thank you for being a part of bringing my wife to me. So yeah, I wouldn't have met this wonderful man if my parents didn't decide to get on that boat that day.
Yeah.
The U.S. Coast Guard didn't pick us up. Fort Chaffee and Fort Smith didn't welcome us in. And then I didn't meet you two. So thank you both so much for being in my life. Thank you, everyone who tuned in tonight. I've never had a broadcast last this long. I told them it's going to be 30 minutes. It has now an hour, but it shows that we've had a lot to talk about, and the conversation will continue. So if you want to continue posting in the comments, Jim and Don can answer your questions. And if you need to reach out to them, please do, because now is the time. So thank you and good night.
Thank you, Tran.
Thank you, Tran. Good to see you, Jimmy.
Hey, you got to,